Welcome to the Grand Theft World podcast, hosted and sponsored by grandtheftworld.com. It's March 20th, 2022. This episode's titled something to the effect of Laptop Leak Unleashed. There's a lot to unpack this week. First, we've got this NATO no-fly zone is a no-go.
Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials have made so clear that what they believe they need the most is more warplanes and fighter jets. So why is the U.S. assessing something different? Why does the U.S. believe they know better what Ukraine needs than what Ukrainian officials are saying they need the most?
It sounds like, we're pretty dug in on our position when it comes to the no-fly zone, when it comes to the MiGs, despite this growing bipartisan call in Congress to shift a little bit. So, to put it bluntly, is Zelensky wasting his time tomorrow asking for these things?
President Zelensky is going to be speaking to Congress tomorrow. He's been pushing for fighter jets, a no-fly zone. You have to hear some of those same requests tomorrow as well. Has the administration shifted on that at all?
Though, calling for a no-fly zone. They're a NATO member. They share a border with Russia. How do we view their calls for a no-fly zone?
And on President Zelensky's address tomorrow, of course, he is expected to ask for more assistance, as my colleague noted. A lot of the U.S. positions on that haven't changed, as you just said, when it comes to the no-fly zone. But on the aircraft specifically, the Pentagon said last week that Secretary Austin said they do not support the transfer of additional fighter aircraft at this time. Is that still the United States' position?
Former ambassador to Ukraine, Maria Ivanovich, has been quite outspoken recently, and she said we need to mitigate risk, but it's also true that not taking greater action comes with a risk as well, because Putin is a bully and he only understands strength. Is the president showing enough strength against Putin?
Why won't you guys start doing more war? That's every question is, where are you going to start doing more war? That's every question.
I put on my red war mask.
Yeah, she's got her red war mask on. There's more to this.
Putin were to use chemical weapons, would it change?
Oh, what if Putin used chemical weapons? Would it change the president's thinking when it comes to these MiG? What can we do to get us to ramp up this war with Russia? What can we do? Look at her eyes are big. What if he uses chemical weapons?
We've got TikTok propaganda. I personally don't use TikTok. I haven't seen TikTok. Apparently they use it to propagandize the young children.
Cam, what's on your radar?
Well, last Thursday, 30 TikTok influencers were invited to a White House Zoom call for a press briefing about the war in Ukraine and rising gas prices. The social media stars were briefed by National Security Council staffers and Jen Psaki, where they were basically told inflation is Putin's fault. The goal of the White House is obvious. It's to get their messaging or propaganda out to the younger generations who consume most of their information through the platform. Ironically, it's a Chinese-owned platform, but that's a different story for a different day. The briefing seemed to work. Shortly after, many TikTokers began, I think that's what they're called these days, right? TikTokers began posting videos about their invitation and what they learned. So here's an example.
Why is gas so expensive, and why is the United States inflation rate at a 4-time decade high? I had the opportunity to ask the White House why gas down the street is $7, and here's what they said. The obvious reason: we are getting out of a 2-year pandemic. When use goes up, price goes up.
Oh, do you pause there real quick?
Up.
This is from the Wall Street Journal of all publications. How much oil had the U.S. been importing from Russia? To about 7.9. The U.S. still consumes far more oil than companies extract domestically, requiring it to import some supplies, but is less reliant on Russia's oil than Europe, and takes only a small portion of its imported crude from Russia. I saw estimates as low as 3%. I just had to get that on the record because it's tough to watch this without going to facts and finding out that this is all just a narrative they're crafting that has does not pertain to reality whatsoever. Anyways, go ahead. That's like one of many different.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
Really don't got to think about it. That's right.
But the call was predominantly about Ukraine and Russia, so how does that relate? Russia is one of the top 3 producers of oil, and it is actually their #1 revenue source. Now, with Putin starting this horrific fight between Ukraine and Russia, nobody wants to work with him and do international trade. So with people being scared of war and limited resources, prices are bound to go up as well. For the people who can't pay $7 for a gallon of gas, there's an app called Gas Buddy that shows you the cheapest gas near you, as well as a link in my bio to donate to the misplaced refugees of Ukraine.
All right, so obviously with only 30 TikTok influencers involved, the White House was selective on who they invited. They likely sorted through numerous accounts to find those who were most likely going to hear the White House's explanations and ultimately parrot them. So this would be unlike other press briefings where even hostile news organizations could be in the room, and in the end, what they report on and how they spin it is up to them. The White House knows each time they do a press briefing, Fox is going to walk away with one spin to the story while CNN has another. So the entire idea of a curated friendly group calls the ethics of this into question, except are TikTok influencers journalists? Because if they are, then it's a scandal to only invite the friendly ones. But if they're just entertainers, then is it really any different than picking and choosing celebrity sponsors who then promote products or ideas? Then again, one could ask if it's even the job of the government to essentially hire or encourage celebrity spokespeople for the messages they want to amplify. Should the government be doing that? Celebrity spokespeople are common with nonprofit organizations and charities that promote certain agendas, but should our government be engaging in this, or should they just put information out there and then hope the private and nonprofit sector do the promoting? Along these same lines, it recently came out through a Freedom of Information Act request filed by Blaze Media that the U.S. government paid $1 billion to various news organizations to promote COVID vaccines. The Blaze reports organizations such as ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox News, CNN, Newsmax, MSNBC, New York Post, Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, BuzzFeed News, as well as hundreds of local newspapers and TV stations were paid using Americans' tax dollars to, quote, strengthen vaccine confidence in the United States. Many of these organizations silenced any sort of dissent in the process. I personally know writers who worked for some of these even more right-wing organizations who pitched contrarian stories only to be told by their editors, no way.
There's also the Hunter Biden laptop story. Is now a thing.
The New York Times has now admitted Hunter Biden's laptop is authentic, the emails are real, and this very much so implicates Joe Biden.
Some breaking news here on the Hunter Biden investigation. So a couple of top-line things from the New York Times. Number one, a federal investigation into Hunter Biden continues. Let's put this up there on the screen. He had a significant, nearly $1 million tax bill that he had to take a loan out in order to pay and squash some IRS questions about some of his financial liabilities. But the most important one is that emails that were taken off of the Hunter Biden laptop were authenticated by the Justice Department and are being used in this federal investigation for violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, of foreign lobbying, and all sorts of shady stuff that he was up to. Here's the thing. Everybody knew, everyone who had a brain knew this laptop was real. And yet, during the election, I know it's been 2 years. I don't like talking about it. But guess what? We have to, because now the president's son is under federal investigation. The reason is that whenever they never denied that the laptop wasn't real, that's how you knew it was real.
Yeah, you knew it was real.
And yet the media, this has all the hallmarks of a Russian disinformation. I'll never forget that one. Oh, the hallmarks. Hallmarks? So it looks like a Russian disinformation op, except that the underlying material is true. And now the Biden's Justice Department is authenticated that laptop and using it as part of their investigation. Now, the really interesting stuff here. As recently as last month, a federal grand jury heard testimony in Wilmington, Delaware, one of whom was a former employee for Hunter Biden, in regards to money that Mr. Biden received from a Ukrainian energy company. The investigation, which began as a tax inquiry under the Obama administration, widened in 2018 to include possible criminal violation of tax law, as well as foreign lobbying and money laundering rules. Now remember, we already know from the Ron Johnson report out of Congress, which again was never denied, as well as open source information, that Hunter was taking money from all sorts of shady regimes. The Romanians, the Ukrainians, the Chinese, all of these very convoluted tax structures clearly designed to skirt U.S. tax law, which is also, it shows us another thing. If he needed a loan to pay his bills, he could be broke. That's another issue that he's had, which may explain why he was auctioning his fake art for hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Hey, he pulled in some cash on that, didn't he?
I love how we all just brushed over that, right? Which is the president's son is selling, high dollar art in a clear corrupt move where we don't get to know who the buyer is.
And then also we've got special guests coming up tonight.
But you brought up the tentacles too. We can't, I'd be remiss if we don't mention British
Danny
Freemasonry.
Casolaro. Oh,
Well, okay, Danny Classo, sure, but British Freemasonry is a really important sort of element too. Jessica Harlan Jacobs' book, The British Empire and Freemasonry, is something to sort of reference.
where it shows they set up
the cultural
trading
elements.
posts,
Yes, where
and then they set up forts, and then it was Freemasonic lodges, then trading posts, then forts, fortified trading posts, and then they made it a colony. And there was like this step of progression. Are you familiar with that book, Matthew?
I am not familiar with that particular book, though. I do find British Freemasonry fascinating. And especially the Rosicrucian pre-Freemasonic operations too are very, very useful to look into. And I'm preparing a presentation right now that I'm going to have to deliver in a couple of weeks, and I'm underprepared. But I've just been delving into the life and times, the geopolitical environment of Thomas More, like what was the world he was living in, and this has forced me to really confront a lot of these occult Freemasonic operations. Well, it was Rosicrucian secret society operations that were being run within the courts of England at the time, which is very interesting because it sort of leads you into what the hell did Henry VIII, the guy who had all of this potential, he was trained by Thomas More to be a continuation of his father Henry VII's policies to break the Venetian Empire. I mean, Henry VII was one of the key guys who was part of the organizing process that was going on in 1508, 1509. Erasmus was a part of that. So was Leonardo da Vinci, Machiavelli, to create the League of Cambrai.
We're going to hear also a little bit from our guest from last week, Richard Gage, who sponsored the 9/11 Pentacon conference. And last but not least, there is a lot of news this past week about Vladimir Putin and his relationship with Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum.
Take and send this video out to everyone you know, right? I hope you already did that. Wait, what? Are there... I get the sense there are people in the crowd there who are a little bit upset about this, who feel a little bit personally threatened or upset or emotionally involved in the idea that Putin and Xi Jinping are 1,000% on board with the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and all of the globalist buzzwords and all of their plans, and that's exactly what they are attempting to implement, that is the BRICS saviors that so many in the alternative media seem to hold up as some sort of great, wonderful, crusading white helmets who are going to come in on their horses and save the day at the end of this horrible nightmare we're living through. But I know my audience is much better informed about things than that. You wouldn't have fallen for that. So there's no reason you would feel personally upset about the fact that actually, oh no, everything that was wrong and that I saw demonstrably was wrong when I thought Trudeau was saying it is still demonstrably wrong when Putin is saying it, right? Right, exactly. Because we know the same documentable facts on the public record that we can say about Putin, just like we said about Trudeau. I mean, for one obvious example, one documentable fact, Vladimir Putin is a World Economic Forum stooge.
When I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin.
Fact number 2, Vladimir Putin is a warmonger.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции. Кто бы не пытался помешать нам, а тем более создать угрозы для нашей страны, для нашего народа, должны знать, что ответ России будет незамедлительным и приведет вас к таким последствиям, с которыми вы в своей истории еще никогда не сталкивались.
Fact number 3. Vladimir Putin is seeking to shut down all media dissent in his country and control the dissemination of information in Russia.
Putin signs fake news. Internet insults bill into law. This coming from the Moscow Times. Putin has signed a controversial set of bills that make it a crime to disrespect the state and spread fake news online. The legislation will establish punishments for spreading information that, quote, exhibits blatant disrespect for the society, government, official government symbols, constitution, or governmental bodies of Russia, end quote.
This is what an information war looks like when it hits the streets. Police in Moscow's Lubyanka Square, wrapped in body armor, seizing the phones of citizens, searching for evidence of resistance. Telltale social media content about the war in Ukraine that can land people in prison. It's doom scrolling, Russian style.
Просто хотела спросить, как вы думаете, если здесь просто сказать два слова, меня за это сейчас арестуют или нет?
Вас уже задерживают.
Fact number 4. Putin was pushing all of the same COVID biosecurity tyranny nonsense during the scandemic as Canada and the US and basically every other country for the past 2 years.
Putin spoke with newly elected lawmakers and urged them to actively support efforts to get more people vaccinated. The Kremlin says the number of COVID-19 cases is rising due to an insufficient amount of people getting inoculated. Russia was the fastest country to develop and launch the Sputnik V vaccine last year. However, the vaccination drive has been slow as Russians do not entirely trust the authorities and fear new medical projects.
В сложных условиях работают медицинские работники. Спасти людей от инфицирования, от тяжелого течения болезни способна вакцинация. Мы с вами это хорошо знаем. Необходимо наращивать ее темп. Я прошу вас принять самое активное участие в этой работе.
Предъявите ваш QR-код для прохода в помещение. QR-код подтвержден. Предъявите ваш паспорт. Документ подтвержден. Приятного отдыха.
Fact number 5. Putin is pushing the AI-driven transhumanist Fourth Industrial Revolution nightmare.
AI-enabled solutions have indeed become part and parcel of our life. Today it's the point of gravity for talented, creative people ready to dream and achieve their goals. It's the front edge of scientific engineering thought. It's important that such breakthrough solutions that open up truly infinite opportunities be beneficial for the humanity, not detrimental. They should help save our planet, provide for its sustainable development. I count that all these issues we will discuss during the Sber's international conference that has already become, as Mr. Greff has mentioned, one of the main global platforms to talk AI.
And, of course, Putin also loves China and its dictatorship.
Китай первым столкнулся с этой угрозой, с пандемией коронавирусной инфекции и продемонстрировал затем всему миру, что можно успешно с этим бороться. Я хочу вас поздравить, уважаемые коллеги, уважаемый господин председатель, и всех наших китайских друзей с тем, как была выстроена работа по борьбе с пандемией. Результат действительно существенный, ясный, понятный. И хочу еще раз повторить, это хороший пример для других.
Right? I mean, all of these are documentable, verifiable facts, so there's no reason that anyone in the conspiracy realist crowd who has done their research on these matters should be in any way offended, upset, emotionally involved in the idea that, surprise, surprise, another politician is doing what politicians do, trying to control their citizenry. That's what they're all interested in. And in this case, just as in Trudeau's case, it is in the service of a greater agenda, a Great Reset agenda.
Before we get into tonight's deep dives and explorations of all things East India Company with our guest, who's not the author of these books. He's got other books I didn't get yet. Before we get to that, let's get to Luke Rudowski's kickoff for this week. Let's get a little summary. Look at me looking at the wrong camera for that. whoa, what's this show going to be like? You're going to have to tune in and hang on to this. Strap yourselves in. Let's go to Radowski for the kickoff. I'll compose myself with the many busy things going on around here in the studio, and we'll kick off the show.
Right? What's today's Gutenberg press? The internet. The decentralization of information, and then because of that, the decentralization of currency in the form of crypto is disrupting power. Because the way that after the revolution of the Reformation and the printing press, control was still possible, though obviously not to that level, which is why we no longer have those absolute monarchies. But control in a nation-state context was still possible to an extent because the money supply was controlled. Now what's happening is that the invention of the internet, with the decentralization of information, and in particular here the decentralization of currency in the form of cryptocurrencies, is disrupting those power hierarchies, and it's leading to this conflict now. And we're in a moment when the printing press was invented, the powers that be needed to try and hold on to that power as the 30 Years' War kicked off. They eventually lost it, but to hold on to it, they became very brutal because they were losing their grip on power. Today, to have the infrastructure in place that you can have a checkpoint Charlie society, so that when the central banking digital currencies are in place, that infrastructure is already there because people were so scared they voluntarily allowed you to put that in place, so that you can maintain your grip on power, because what's coming around the corner is the decentralization of everything, of media, therefore of narrative, and of course remember, whoever defines the truth gets to define reality. Decentralization of the economy through crypto. You no longer have the power to define the story and control the money supply. So the powers that be, who are losing that power, need to clamp down.
A cashless, digital track, trace, and database society. Total enslavement is what they want because a bunch of sociopathic, crazy old people want to keep their grip of power. Yeah, no thank you. I prefer decentralization.
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happen. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions. We can get into the show, we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come on.